The Forgotten Kingdoms of Japan, Lost Empires Beneath the Mountains. Welcome to Simply About Earth, where we journey through the hidden valleys of history, exploring the forgotten realms that time has gently tucked away beneath mountain mists and ancient forests. Tonight, we venture into a world of vanished kingdoms and lost dynasties, to the sacred mountains and hidden valleys of Japan, where empires rose and fell long before the age of samurai, where mysterious peoples built civilizations that would one day fade into legend and myth. The Forgotten Kingdoms of Japan, names that whisper through time like wind through bamboo groves, lie scattered across islands wrapped in fog and mystery. Here, beneath the volcanic peaks and within the deep mountain valleys, ancient peoples created worlds of remarkable sophistication, cultures that flourished for centuries before disappearing into the shadows of history, leaving behind only fragments of their story, tantalizing clues carved in stone, buried in earth, and preserved in the fading memories of remote villages. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight, as we embark together on this journey through Japan's hidden past, back to kingdoms that existed before history itself began to write their names. Picture, if you will, the Japanese archipelago as it existed over 2,000 years ago, a chain of mountainous islands rising from the Pacific, covered in dense forests of cedar and cypress, where rivers cascade down steep valleys toward coastlines rich with marine life. This was a land of incredible natural abundance, yet also a land of isolation, where mountain ranges and treacherous seas created natural barriers that would allow distinct cultures to develop in relative separation from one another. The islands themselves seemed to breathe with a life of their own. Volcanic peaks steamed and rumbled, reminding inhabitants of the powerful forces beneath their feet. Hot springs bubbled up through cracks in the earth, creating sacred pools where steam mingled with mountain mists. The very ground trembled periodically, as if the islands were living creatures shifting in their sleep. And this dynamic landscape shaped not only how people lived, but how they understood the world and their place within it. In spring, cherry blossoms transformed entire mountainsides into clouds of pink and white, their brief flowering a reminder of beauty's transience, a theme that would echo through Japanese culture for millennia to come. Summer brought heavy rains that swelled rivers and tested the engineering of early irrigation systems, while autumn painted forests in brilliant reds and golds, the changing leaves marking time's passage with stunning clarity. Winter snows blanketed mountain peaks and isolated valley communities, creating periods of introspection and storytelling around hearth fires that preserved cultural memory through the long dark months. Long before the classical age of imperial Japan, before the rise of the samurai clans, before Buddhism arrived from the continent, the islands were home to peoples whose origins remain shrouded in mystery. The Jorom culture, dating back over 15,000 years, created some of the world's earliest pottery and developed a sophisticated hunter-gatherer society that would persist for millennia. Their descendants, the Yayoi people, brought wet rice cultivation and bronze working, transforming the landscape and laying the foundations for the kingdoms that would follow. By the 3rd century of the Common Era, Japan had fragmented into numerous small kingdoms and tribal confederations, each ruling over a valley or coastal plain, each developing its own customs and culture. Chinese records from this period speak of a land divided into 100 kingdoms, places with names like Yamatai, Na, and Kunu, realms that existed in the twilight between prehistory and recorded history, known to us only through fragments of foreign chronicles and the silent testimony of archaeological remains. These were the Forgotten Kingdoms, societies that built impressive fortifications, conducted trade with Korea and China, practiced sophisticated agriculture, and developed complex religious and political systems. Yet their stories, their triumphs and tragedies, their kings and queens, have largely vanished from memory, preserved only in scattered legends and the patient work of archaeologists piecing together clues from burial mounds and ancient settlements. The kingdom of Yamatai stands as perhaps the most enigmatic of these lost realms, known to us primarily through Chinese historical records, particularly the Weizi Chronicle compiled in the 3rd century. Yamatai was said to be ruled by a mysterious shaman queen named Himiko, a woman who wielded both spiritual and political power over her people, and served as an intermediary between the human world and the realm of spirits. Himiko's reign, lasting several decades in the 3rd century, represents a fascinating glimpse into an era when female rulers held sway over Japanese kingdoms. The Chinese chronicles describe her as a powerful sorceress who rarely appeared before her people, governing from within a fortified palace surrounded by towers and palisades, attended by 1,000 female servants while a single man served her food and carried her messages to the outside world. The location of Yamatai itself remains one of Japanese archaeology's greatest mysteries. Some scholars place it in the Kinai region of central Japan, while others argue for Kyushu in the south. Each theory has its passionate defenders, and the debate has raged for over a century, with each new archaeological discovery potentially shifting the balance of evidence. The truth, like so much else about these ancient kingdoms, remains hidden beneath layers of time and earth, waiting for the patient work of scholars to gradually reveal its secrets. Under Himiko's rule, Yamatai maintained diplomatic and trade relations with the Chinese Wei dynasty, receiving official recognition and prestigious gifts including bronze mirrors, silk, and jade. These diplomatic exchanges suggest a kingdom of considerable sophistication, capable of navigating the complex political landscape of East Asia and maintaining its independence while engaging with the great powers of the continent. The chronicles tell us that after Himiko's death, Yamatai descended into chaos and warfare until another woman, said to be related to Himiko, was installed as queen and restored peace to the realm. This brief mention hints at succession crises and internal conflicts that must have shaped the kingdom's history, yet the details remain frustratingly obscure, lost to the silence of the centuries. Beyond Yamatai, dozens of other kingdoms existed across the Japanese islands during this period. The kingdom of Na, located in northern Kyushu, received a golden seal from the Han Emperor in the 1st century, a priceless artifact that was rediscovered in the 18th century and now serves as tangible proof of these ancient realms' existence. The seal bearing the inscription King of Nohoba under Han demonstrates that Japanese kingdoms were engaging with continental powers far earlier than traditional histories had suggested. In the mountainous regions of central Japan, kingdoms like Koshi and Izumo developed in relative isolation, their peoples adapting to the challenges of mountain agriculture and forging distinctive cultural identities. These mountain kingdoms left fewer traces than their coastal counterparts, their wooden structures and organic materials having long since returned to the earth, yet their influence on later Japanese culture would prove profound. The Izumo region in particular holds a special place in Japanese mythology and history. Ancient legends speak of the kingdom of Izumo as a realm where gods walked among mortals, where the great deity Okunanushi ruled over a prosperous land before ceding authority to the ancestors of the imperial line. The Grand Shrine of Izumo, one of Japan's most ancient and venerated religious sites, preserves memories of this forgotten kingdom's spiritual power. Archaeological excavations in recent decades have revealed that Izumo was indeed a major political and religious center in ancient times, possessing sophisticated bronze-working techniques and maintaining extensive trade networks. The discovery of hundreds of bronze swords and bells, many of enormous size, suggests ritual practices and religious beliefs that differed significantly from those that would later dominate Japanese culture. The people of these ancient kingdoms lived lives intimately connected to the rhythms of nature and the demands of their environment. In coastal regions, fishing and salt production provided essential resources, while mountain dwellers developed sophisticated techniques for terracing steep hillsides and managing forest resources. Rice cultivation, introduced from the continent, gradually spread throughout the islands, transforming societies and enabling population growth that would fuel the rise of more complex political structures. Villages in this era were small, consisting of pit dwellings dug into the earth with thatched roofs supported by wooden posts. Families gathered around central hearths where fires burned continuously, providing warmth, light, and a focus for daily life. The dead were buried in distinctive jar coffins or stone chambers, often accompanied by precious objects that might serve them in the afterlife. These burial customs varying considerably between regions and kingdoms. Religion in these ancient societies centered on the worship of natural forces and ancestral spirits. Mountains, rivers, and ancient trees were seen as dwelling places of kami, divine beings who influenced every aspect of human existence. Shamans and ritual specialists served as intermediaries with the spirit world, conducting ceremonies to ensure good harvests, successful hunts, and protection from natural disasters. These early beliefs would eventually evolve into what we now call Shinto, but in this ancient period, they existed in forms we can only dimly perceive through archaeological evidence and later religious traditions. The transition from these scattered kingdoms to a more unified political entity was neither swift nor simple. It unfolded gradually over centuries, driven by a complex interplay of warfare, alliance, trade, and cultural exchange. Powerful clans gradually extended their influence over wider territories, absorbing smaller kingdoms through conquest or marriage alliances, slowly building the foundations of what would become the Yamato state. The Yamato polity, emerging in the Kinai region of central Japan around the 4th century, would eventually claim supremacy over the other kingdoms of Japan, though this process took several more centuries to complete and was never as absolute as later imperial histories would claim. The rulers of Yamato, who would eventually become Japan's imperial dynasty, traced their descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu, claiming divine authority that legitimized their expanding power. The great keyhole-shaped tombs known as kofun, built for Yamato rulers and other powerful leaders from the 4th to 7th centuries, testify to the remarkable resources and organizational capabilities these early states could marshal. The largest of these tombs, such as the one traditionally attributed to Emperor Nintoku, rival the pyramids of Egypt in scale, requiring the labor of thousands of workers over many years. These monuments serve not only as final resting places for the elite, but also as powerful symbols of authority and demonstrations of a ruler's ability to command resources and loyalty. Inside these tombs, archaeologists have discovered remarkable treasures, gilded bronze crowns, intricate jewelry, iron weapons and armor, ceramic figures called haniwa that depicted warriors, horses, houses, and daily life scenes, all carefully arranged to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The haniwa in particular provide invaluable insights into the appearance, clothing, and activities of people in this period, frozen in clay for eternity like windows into a vanished world. If you're enjoying this journey through Japan's hidden past, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us continue creating these deep explorations of forgotten worlds and brings these lost kingdoms to more curious minds around the globe. The spread of Buddhism from Korea in the 6th century brought profound changes to Japanese society and helped accelerate the decline of the old kingdom system. Buddhist monasteries became centers of learning and culture, introducing new technologies, art forms, and philosophical concepts from the continent. The adoption of Chinese-style government structures, writing systems, and bureaucratic practices gradually transformed Japan from a confederation of competing kingdoms into a more centralized state modeled on Tang Dynasty China. Yet the old kingdoms did not simply vanish overnight. Many retained considerable autonomy well into the historical period, maintaining their own customs, religious practices, and power structures even as they nominally acknowledged the supremacy of the Yamato court. The great clans of Kaishu, the mountain lords of the interior, the maritime chiefs of the eastern provinces, all preserved elements of their ancestral kingdom's independence, creating a complex political landscape that would shape Japanese history for centuries to come. In the northeastern regions of Honshu, kingdoms of the Emishi people resisted incorporation into the expanding Yamato state for centuries. These were fierce mountain warriors who had developed their own distinctive culture, maintaining ways of life that predated the arrival of rice agriculture and preserving customs that the expanding Japanese state viewed as barbaric. The gradual conquest and assimilation of Emishi territories was a slow and often brutal process that continued well into the medieval period, each valley and mountain stronghold yielding only after long campaigns. The fortifications built by these mountain kingdoms still dot the Japanese landscape, their earthen walls and defensive ditches, now barely visible beneath forests that have reclaimed them over the centuries. These sites, often located on commanding heights with sweeping views of surrounding valleys, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of military engineering and strategic placement. Walking among these ancient defenses today, one can still sense the determination of peoples who fought to maintain their independence, to preserve their ways of life against the tide of history. The daily life of people in these forgotten kingdoms would seem both familiar and strange to modern eyes. Families rose with the sun, working the fields or tending fishing nets according to the seasons. Children learned their parents' skills through observation and practice, gradually taking on more responsible roles as they matured. Evenings brought the community together around fires where stories were shared, songs were sung, and the memories of ancestors were kept alive through oral tradition. Imagine the rhythm of a typical day in one of these ancient villages. The first light touches mountain peaks while valleys remain wrapped in shadow. A rooster's crow breaks the silence, followed by the soft sounds of people stirring. Children emerge from their homes rubbing sleep from their eyes, while adults begin the day's work with practiced efficiency born of countless repetitions. Women head to the river or village, clay vessels balanced on their heads or cradled in their arms. The morning water gathering becomes a social time, news exchanged, friendships maintained, young people stealing glances at potential marriage partners under the watchful eyes of older relatives. The sound of water splashing into containers, laughter and conversation, the slap of wet clothes being beaten against rocks. These sounds mark the beginning of each new day. In the fields, men and older boys prepare tools and check irrigation channels, ensuring water flows properly to sustain the precious rice crop. The work is hard, backs bent for hours under the sun, legs deep in muddy water. But it is also communal, neighbors helping neighbors, work songs keeping rhythm, shared purpose binding people together in ways that transcend individual hardship. The smell of cooking fires drifts through the village as women prepare the morning meal, rice steaming in wooden containers, vegetables simmering, perhaps fish grilling over coals if the previous day's catch was successful. Children are sent on errands, fetching this or that, learning responsibility through small tasks that grow more complex as they age. By midday, the sun is high, and work pauses for rest and food. People gather in whatever shade they can find, eating simple meals while discussing the day's work and sharing village gossip. Old people sit together, their working days behind them, but their wisdom still sought on matters of custom and tradition. They watch the younger generations with eyes that have seen decades of seasons, births and deaths, marriages and funerals, the endless cycle of village life. Afternoons bring different tasks. Women might weave cloth or make pottery, their skilled hands transforming raw materials into useful objects. Craftsmen work in specialized workshops, the rhythmic hammering of metal workers, the patient carving of woodworkers, the focused concentration of those who make the tools and objects that support community life. Children play games that teach skills they will need as adults, mock battles with wooden swords, races that build strength and speed, songs and dances that preserve cultural knowledge. As evening approaches, people return from fields and forests. Cooking fires are rekindled, sending smoke rising into the darkening sky. Baths are taken, washing away the day's grime in heated water, a ritual purification that is both practical and spiritual. Evening meals are eaten, families gathering in the warm glow of firelight, sharing food and conversation, the day's experiences becoming part of family lore. After the evening meal, when darkness has fully settled, this is when the old stories are told. The village elders begin to speak, their voices carrying the weight of generations, tales of the gods and ancestors, of heroes and monsters, of the founding of the village and the great events that shaped it. Children listen with wide eyes, absorbing the stories that will one day be their responsibility to pass on. These stories are not mere entertainment, but the very foundation of cultural identity, the thread connecting past to present to future. Food in this era was simple but nutritious. Rice was the staple crop, supplemented by vegetables like taro and radishes, fish and shellfish from rivers and seas, and wild plants gathered from forests and mountains. Meat was eaten more rarely, primarily from wild game like deer and boar, though domesticated chickens provided both eggs and occasional meat. The seasonal rhythms of food availability shaped religious festivals and social customs, with harvest celebrations and winter solstice observances, marking the turning of the year. Clothing was primarily made from hemp or bark fiber, woven on simple looms and dyed with natural pigments from plants and minerals. The wealthy might wear silk imported from China or Korea, its lustrous texture and vibrant colors marking social distinction. Jewelry and personal ornaments crafted from jade, amber, or magatama beads served both decorative and spiritual purposes, believed to offer protection or convey status. The crafts and technologies of these ancient kingdoms demonstrate remarkable sophistication. Bronze and iron working reached high levels of skill, producing not only weapons and tools, but also ritual objects of great beauty. Potters created vessels ranging from simple utilitarian wares to elaborate ceremonial pieces decorated with intricate patterns. Woodworkers crafted everything from buildings to boats, developing techniques for joining wood without nails and creating structures that could withstand earthquakes and typhoons. The Suware pottery tradition, introduced from Korea in the 5th century, represents a technological leap forward in ceramic production. Fired at much higher temperatures than earlier pottery, Suware was harder, more durable, and could be made into more complex forms. The kilns used to produce these wares required sophisticated knowledge of temperature control and fuel management, demonstrating the high level of technical expertise present in these ancient societies. Trade networks connected even the most remote mountain kingdoms to wider worlds. Obsidian, from volcanic sources, traveled hundreds of miles to be fashioned into tools and ornaments. Jade from distant mountains was worked into curved beads called magatama that held spiritual significance. Salt, a precious commodity, moved from coastal production sites deep into the interior. These trade routes, following river valleys and mountain passes, created connections between kingdoms that might otherwise have remained isolated, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices. The spiritual lives of people in these forgotten kingdoms were rich and complex, permeating every aspect of existence. Kami spirits were believed to inhabit not only grand mountains and ancient trees, but also humble household objects and agricultural implements. Ritual purification using water was essential before approaching sacred sites or engaging in important activities. Festivals marking planting and harvest, births and deaths, the changing seasons and celestial events, all required specific ceremonies to maintain harmony between human communities and the spiritual forces that govern the world. Shamans and ritual specialists held positions of great importance, serving as healers, diviners, and intermediaries with the spirit realm. These individuals, often women, underwent rigorous training and initiation rites to develop their spiritual powers. Through trance states, often induced by rhythmic drumming or dancing, they could communicate with ancestral spirits, divine the future, or determine the causes of illness and misfortune. The Chinese Chronicle's description of Queen Himiko as a powerful shaman reflects this tradition of spiritual authority combined with political power. Mountains held particular spiritual significance in ancient Japanese belief, seen as dwelling places of gods and ancestors. They were approached with reverence and often considered too sacred for ordinary mortals to climb. Certain peaks served as pilgrimage destinations where people came to pray for blessings or healing. The cone of Mount Fuji, even then, commanded awe and devotion, its perfect symmetry and snow-capped summit, embodying the majesty of the divine. Sacred groves and ancient trees served as natural shrines where offerings were made and prayers spoken. A massive cedar or cryptomeria tree that had stood for centuries was understood as a living bridge between earth and heaven, a manifestation of kami presence in the physical world. Many such trees still stand today in the grounds of Shinto shrines, their gnarled trunks and spreading branches bearing witness to countless generations who have approached them with reverence. The relationship between different kingdoms was complex and constantly shifting. Alliances formed and dissolved. Marriages united rival clans. Trade brought prosperity, and warfare erupted over contested territories or resources. Some kingdoms maintained their independence through diplomatic skill, playing more powerful neighbors against each other. Others built their strength through military prowess, developing warrior traditions that would eventually evolve into the samurai culture of later centuries. Warfare in this period was brutal and personal, fought with bronze and iron weapons at close quarters. Armored warriors wielded swords, spears, and bows, while commoners might be pressed into service bearing simpler weapons or serving support roles. Fortified settlements served as refuges during conflicts, their wooden palisades and earthen ramparts providing protection for populations under attack. The taking of heads as trophies, a practice that would persist in Japanese warfare for over a millennium, seems to have originated in this ancient period. Yet warfare was not constant, and many kingdoms maintained long periods of peace during which arts and culture flourished. These periods saw the development of distinctive artistic styles, religious practices, and social customs that contributed to the rich diversity of ancient Japanese culture. The peaceful exchange of craftsmen, marriage alliances between ruling families, and shared participation in religious festivals all helped maintain connections between kingdoms even when political relations were strained. The gradual emergence of a written language in Japan, adapted from Chinese characters, began to transform these oral cultures into literate ones. Though literacy remained confined to a small elite for centuries, the ability to record laws, maintain historical chronicles, and compose poetry opened new possibilities for cultural development and political administration. The earliest Japanese writings, dating to the 7th and 8th centuries, preserve fragments of older oral traditions, including myths and legends that may trace back to the forgotten kingdoms. The Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Japan's oldest surviving chronicles compiled in the 8th century, present a mythologized history that mingles gods and mortals, weaving the stories of various regional kingdoms into a grand narrative centered on the imperial line's divine descent and destined supremacy. Yet beneath the mythology, scholars can detect echoes of real historical events and kingdoms, carefully reading between the lines to reconstruct the complex political landscape of ancient Japan. These chronicles speak of land pacification campaigns, the courtly euphemism for conquest and subjugation of independent kingdoms, the stories of divine heroes who overcame local deities and brought regions under imperial control, reflect the very real process by which the Yamato state expanded its authority. Each conquered kingdom, each submitted clan, each pacified region contributed its own stories and traditions to the emerging Japanese cultural identity. Please consider subscribing to Simply About Earth. We're dedicated to bringing you these immersive journeys through forgotten worlds, exploring the hidden corners of history that shaped our present. Your subscription helps us continue this important work of making history accessible and engaging for everyone. The process of state formation was not simply a matter of military conquest. Cultural assimilation played an equally important role. As kingdoms were incorporated into the expanding Yamato sphere, local elites were often allowed to maintain authority over their territories, receiving titles and positions in the new order. Their local deities were incorporated into the imperial religious system, their clan histories woven into the broader narrative of Japanese origins. This inclusive approach, while erasing the independence of local kingdoms, helped create a synthesis that drew strength from diversity. The introduction of Buddhism provided another powerful tool for political integration. Buddhist monasteries, often built with support from the central government, served as centers of learning and culture that promoted values compatible with state authority. The merit gained from supporting Buddhist institutions, the protection offered by Buddhist prayers and rituals, these incentives encouraged local lords to align themselves with the emerging order. Yet many also maintained their ancestral Shinto practices, creating the distinctive synthesis of Buddhism and Shinto that would characterize Japanese religion. In remote mountain regions, however, older ways persisted longer. Villages cut off by deep snows in winter maintained customs and beliefs that had disappeared elsewhere. Mountain ascetics, inheriting traditions from ancient shamans, practiced austerities in sacred peaks far from centers of political power. These mountain practitioners, later organized into religious traditions like Shugendo, preserved elements of pre-Buddhist Japanese spirituality that had been largely supplanted elsewhere. The archaeological record of Japan's ancient period continues to yield remarkable discoveries. Each new excavation has the potential to revise our understanding of these forgotten kingdoms. Recent decades have seen the discovery of massive irrigation systems, evidence of sophisticated agriculture that supported larger populations than previously imagined. Fortified settlements with complex layouts suggest advanced military and administrative capabilities. Rich burial goods indicate extensive trade networks and accumulated wealth. Perhaps most dramatically, the discovery of large ritual sites suggests religious practices of unexpected complexity. The Yoshinogari site in Kyushu, with its reconstructed watchtowers, moats, and ceremonial buildings, provides tangible evidence of how these ancient kingdoms appeared. Walking through the reconstructed settlement, visitors can glimpse a world where political and religious authority were inseparable, where rulers governed from fortified compounds that served as both palaces and temples. The role of women in these ancient kingdoms appears to have been more prominent than in later Japanese history. Queen Himiko represents the most famous example, but evidence suggests she was not unique. Female shamans and priestesses wielded considerable spiritual authority, while clan systems that included matrilineal elements gave some women significant political influence. The gradual adoption of Chinese Confucian values, with their emphasis on patriarchal authority, would eventually marginalize women's public roles, but in the age of the Forgotten Kingdoms, women could attain positions of power and prestige. The material culture recovered from elite burials provides insights into the sophistication and aesthetic sensibilities of these ancient societies. Intricately decorated bronze mirrors, some imported from China but others of local manufacture, served both practical and ritual purposes. The designs etched into their backs complex geometric patterns or scenes of deities and mythical creatures demonstrate high levels of artistic skill and symbolic meaning we can only partially decipher. Magatama beads, those distinctive comma-shaped ornaments, appear in various materials from jade to glass. Each bead was carefully shaped and polished, requiring hours of skilled labor. Necklaces combining magatama with tubular beads and other ornaments must have been stunning displays of wealth and status. The spiritual significance of these beads, possibly representing jewels of fertility or emblems of authority, remains a subject of scholarly debate. Weapons recovered from ancient sites show the deadly seriousness of warfare in this period. Long iron swords, some over a meter in length, required considerable skill to forge and wield effectively. Arrowheads of various designs, armor plates of leather or iron, all testify to the importance of military capability in maintaining kingdoms' independence. Yet these weapons were also works of craftsmanship, with decorative elements that elevated them beyond mere tools of violence to objects of beauty and prestige. The horses that arrived in Japan during this period, probably from Korea, transformed warfare and society. Mounted warriors gained decisive advantages in battle, while horse ownership became a mark of elite status. The Hanawa clay figures of horses found at tomb sites, some with elaborate saddles and decorative trappings, show how important these animals became to military and social organization. The spread of horse culture throughout the islands facilitated communication, trade, and military operations across difficult terrain. Agricultural innovations during this period laid foundations for Japan's future prosperity. The development of paddy field systems, requiring careful water management and communal labor, produced higher yields than earlier dry field cultivation. These wet rice systems also created stable food supplies that could support growing populations and free workers for other activities. The intricate networks of irrigation channels, embankments, and water gates visible in archaeological surveys demonstrate sophisticated hydraulic engineering. Different regions developed agricultural practices suited to their particular environments. Coastal areas supplemented rice cultivation with fishing and seaweed harvesting. Mountain valleys practiced combination farming that integrated rice paddies with dry field crops on hillside terraces. Northern regions, where rice cultivation was more challenging, relied more heavily on millet and other grains. This agricultural diversity contributed to the cultural distinctiveness of different kingdoms, while also creating opportunities for trade and exchange. The changing seasons structured life in these ancient kingdoms with rhythms that persist in Japanese culture to this day. Spring brought the crucial work of rice planting, families working together in mud and water to set out seedlings in prepared fields. Summer required constant vigilance against pests and diseases, along with the back-breaking work of weeding. Autumn harvest was a time of celebration and thanksgiving, with festivals honoring the rice kami and ensuring protection for the coming year. Winter, a time of relative rest, saw repair work on tools and buildings along with indoor crafts and planning for the coming spring. The transmission of cultural practices from one generation to the next occurred primarily through oral tradition and practical apprenticeship. Children learned by watching and helping their parents, gradually taking on more complex tasks as their skills developed. Stories told around winter fires preserved the memories and wisdom of ancestors, passing down knowledge of seasons, plants, animals, and the proper ways of interacting with the spirit world. This oral knowledge, refined over countless generations, represented a vast repository of practical and spiritual understanding. The social hierarchies within these kingdoms were complex and varied between regions. At the top stood ruling families who claimed descent from divine ancestors, their authority legitimized by both spiritual power and military might. Below them were warrior elites who provided military service, craftsmen whose specialized skills were highly valued, farmers who produced the surplus that supported all others, and at the bottom, various dependent peoples whose status ranged from tenant farmers to outright slaves. Yet social mobility was not impossible. Exceptional military prowess, unusual spiritual powers, or remarkable craft skills could elevate individuals or families to higher status. Marriage alliances between classes, while carefully regulated, sometimes occurred and could shift family fortunes. The fluid political situation of this era, with kingdoms rising and falling, created opportunities for ambitious individuals to rise through service to successful rulers. The gradual incorporation of these independent kingdoms into the expanding Yamato state often preserved local power structures within a new framework. Local chiefs became government officials, maintaining authority over their territories, but now as representatives of central authority rather than independent rulers. This system, allowing for regional diversity within nominal unity, would characterize Japanese governance for centuries and help preserve memories and traditions of the old kingdoms, even as their political independence vanished. The mountain fastnesses where many ancient kingdoms developed provided natural protection but also imposed limitations. Steep terrain and limited arable land restricted population growth. Dense forests provided resources but also harbored dangers from wild animals and made travel difficult. Mountain peoples developed distinctive cultures adapted to their environment, with economies based on forestry, hunting, and specialized crops that could thrive in cooler climates at higher elevations. These mountain kingdoms maintained their own religious traditions centered on mountain worship and nature veneration. Sacred peaks were seen as dwelling places of powerful kami, requiring propitiation and respect. Mountain ascetics, seeking spiritual power through austerities in these sacred spaces, created traditions that would eventually develop into organized religious practices. The isolation of mountain regions allowed older beliefs and practices to persist long after they had been supplanted elsewhere. Coastal kingdoms developed around harbors and fishing grounds, their economies based on marine resources and maritime trade. These seafaring peoples developed sophisticated boat-building techniques, creating vessels capable of navigating treacherous coastal waters and even venturing into open ocean. Their knowledge of tides, currents, and seasonal weather patterns accumulated over generations made them masters of their maritime environment. Trade with the Asian continent flowed through these coastal kingdoms, bringing continental innovations and ideas that they would adapt to Japanese conditions. The material remains of these coastal settlements, buried beneath later occupation or submerged by rising sea levels, are more difficult to study than inland sites, yet recent underwater archaeology has revealed harbor structures, fishing weirs, and submerged settlements that provide new insights into maritime kingdoms. Salt production sites, where seawater was evaporated to produce this essential commodity, mark locations where coastal peoples created wealth that could be traded deep into the interior. The artistic traditions that developed in different kingdoms created regional styles that persisted even after political unification. Pottery forms and decoration varied between regions, reflecting both practical considerations and aesthetic preferences. Textile patterns, architectural styles, metalwork designs, all showed distinctive regional characteristics that scholars can now trace through archaeological evidence. These artistic traditions, carrying forward elements from the ancient kingdoms, would contribute to the rich diversity of Japanese art and culture. Musical traditions, though largely lost to us from this early period, undoubtedly existed and played important roles in religious ceremonies, court entertainment, and daily life. Archaeological discoveries of ancient instruments, including drums, flutes, and string instruments, suggest musical practices of considerable sophistication. Songs and chants preserved in later written records sometimes contain archaic language and themes that may echo musical traditions of the forgotten kingdoms. Dance was closely linked to religious ritual, with specific movements and costumes associated with different ceremonies and occasions. Shrine maidens, serving kami through ritual dances, preserved traditions that may extend back to the shamanic practices of ancient queens and priestesses. The Kagura dance traditions still performed at Shinto shrines today may contain elements reaching back to the age of the Forgotten Kingdoms, though transformed by centuries of evolution. The concept of divine kingship that emerged in ancient Japan drew on various sources, indigenous beliefs about the spiritual power of certain lineages, continental ideas about the mandate of heaven, and local practices of shamanic authority. Rulers claimed descent from solar deities or local kami, positioning themselves as essential intermediaries between human communities and the divine forces that govern the world. This ideology served to legitimize political authority while also imposing moral obligations on rulers to govern justly and maintain cosmic harmony. The imperial chronicles compiled in the 8th century presented a version of history that traced the ruling dynasty's lineage back to the age of the gods, portraying the unification of Japan as the fulfillment of divine mandate. Yet this mythologized version obscured the historical reality of numerous independent kingdoms that had existed for centuries, each with its own ruling lineages and divine claims. The process by which these various kingdoms were incorporated into the Yamato state was far more complex and contested than the neat narrative of divine destiny suggested. Archaeological evidence and careful reading of early text reveal traces of resistance to Yamato expansion, rebellions that had to be suppressed, rival claimants to authority who had to be eliminated or co-opted, regions that maintained semi-independence well into the historical period. The forgotten kingdoms did not simply fade away peacefully. Many fought to preserve their autonomy, their struggles leaving marks in the historical record for those who know how to read them. The religious synthesis that emerged as Japan unified drew elements from many regional traditions. Local kami were incorporated into national pantheons, regional festivals were integrated into court calendars, sacred sites from conquered kingdoms were preserved but reinterpreted to fit the new order. This inclusive approach created a remarkably diverse religious landscape that accommodated tremendous regional variation while maintaining nominal unity under imperial ritual authority. The survival of ancient place names across the Japanese landscape provides clues to the locations and territories of forgotten kingdoms. Names ending in kuni, meaning country or kingdom, mark regions that once possessed political autonomy. Geographic features bearing names of ancient deities hint at sacred sites that may have served as spiritual centers for lost realms. Careful study of these toponyms allows scholars to reconstruct political landscapes that existed before written records began. Modern genetic studies are adding new dimensions to our understanding of ancient Japanese populations. DNA analysis reveals that the Japanese people represent a complex mixture of indigenous Jomon populations and later migrants from the Asian continent, with regional variations reflecting different historical experiences. These genetic patterns support archaeological evidence for multiple waves of migration and substantial regional diversity in ancient times, consistent with the existence of numerous distinct kingdoms with different populations and cultural traditions. The climate during the period of the Forgotten Kingdoms was somewhat warmer than today, allowing rice cultivation to extend further north than would later be possible. This climatic optimum supported population growth and agricultural expansion that fueled the rise of increasingly complex societies. But climate was not stable, and periodic fluctuations could bring drought or excessive rainfall that disrupted agriculture, contributing to political instability and warfare as kingdoms competed for diminishing resources. Natural disasters played significant roles in shaping the fates of ancient kingdoms. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and typhoons could devastate communities, destroying crops, damaging infrastructure, and killing substantial portions of populations. How kingdoms responded to such disasters, whether they had systems for relief and recovery, affected their long-term survival. Disasters that struck at critical moments could tip the balance in conflicts between kingdoms or make populations more receptive to promises of protection from more powerful neighbors. The psychological impact of living in this land of natural extremes must have been profound. The ever-present possibility of earthquakes and eruptions, the yearly threat of typhoons, the uncertainty of harvests dependent on weather, all contributed to worldviews that emphasized the importance of maintaining proper relationships with divine forces. The elaborate ritual systems that characterized ancient Japanese religion can be understood partly as attempts to manage anxiety about uncontrollable natural forces through symbolic action and spiritual propitiation. Yet this same environment also fostered resilience and adaptability. Communities that survived disasters developed systems for rapid recovery, building techniques that could withstand earthquakes, agricultural practices that could adapt to variable conditions. The Japanese cultural emphasis on community cooperation and collective action has deep roots in the necessity of responding to environmental challenges that no individual or family could face alone. The transition from the age of forgotten kingdoms to the classical period of Japanese history involved profound transformations in every aspect of life. The adoption of Buddhism and Confucian philosophy introduced new ways of understanding the world and humanity's place in it. The development of a centralized bureaucratic state modeled on China created new forms of social organization and governance. The spread of literacy and written culture transformed how knowledge was preserved and transmitted. Yet beneath these changes, elements of the ancient kingdoms persisted, preserved in regional customs, local festivals, oral traditions, and the continuing veneration of ancient sites. The great clan families of classical and medieval Japan often traced their descent from the ruling lineages of ancient kingdoms. The Fujiwara, Tachibana, Soga, and numerous other clans claimed ancestry reaching back to the age before written records, when their forebears ruled as kings in their own right. These genealogies, while surely embellished and mythologized, preserve memories of the political landscape of ancient Japan, testament to the importance these forgotten kingdoms held in the consciousness of later generations. Certain regions maintained distinctive identities that reflected their history as independent kingdoms. Izumo, Kyushu, and the Northeast in particular preserved strong regional consciousness and cultural practices that set them apart from the Kenai heartland. These regional differences, while gradually diminishing over centuries of political unity, never entirely disappeared, contributing to the rich cultural diversity that characterizes Japan even today. The artistic and spiritual traditions that emerged in ancient Japan would have profound influences extending far beyond the islands themselves. The synthesis of indigenous Japanese sensibilities with continental Buddhist and Confucian traditions created unique cultural forms that would eventually influence Korea, China, and through them, the wider world. Yet the roots of these traditions reached back to the forgotten kingdoms, to the sacred groves and mountain shrines, to the shamans and warrior kings, to the communities that first learned to cultivate rice and work bronze in the Japanese archipelago. Modern Japan, for all its technological advancement and urban development, maintains connections to its ancient past. Shinto shrines preserve ritual practices that may date back millennia. Regional festivals celebrate kami and ancestral spirits, whose origins lie in the age of the forgotten kingdoms. Sacred mountains continue to draw pilgrims seeking spiritual renewal through practices that echo ancient mountain worship. The rice harvest festivals, though now often symbolic, maintain the same basic structure as agricultural ceremonies performed thousands of years ago. The archaeological study of ancient Japan continues to evolve as new techniques become available. Ground-penetrating radar can detect buried structures without excavation. Isotope analysis of human remains reveals diet and migration patterns. DNA studies clarify population relationships and ancient migrations. Digital reconstruction allows scholars to visualize ancient landscapes and settlements as they once appeared. Each new technological capability adds to our understanding of the forgotten kingdoms, bringing them gradually back into the light of history. Yet much remains unknown, and perhaps unknowable: the daily thoughts and feelings of people in these ancient times, their jokes and songs, their loves and fears. These intimate human experiences are largely lost to us. We can study their material remains, read later myths that may preserve fragments of their stories, but the living reality of their existence, the texture of their daily lives, remains tantalizingly out of reach. This distance creates both frustration and fascination, driving scholars to continue searching for new evidence while acknowledging the limits of what can ever be known. The lesson of the Forgotten Kingdoms is partly about the fragility of human memory and the ease with which entire civilizations can slip into obscurity. These were not minor societies, but sophisticated kingdoms with complex political systems, rich cultural traditions, and thousands of inhabitants. Yet within a few centuries of their disappearance as independent entities, their stories had largely vanished, surviving only in fragments and legends. This should give us pause as we consider our own civilization, reminding us that continuity cannot be taken for granted, and that the preservation of cultural memory requires conscious effort across generations. At the same time, the Forgotten Kingdoms demonstrate the resilience of cultural traditions. Even when political independence was lost, many elements of these ancient cultures persisted, transformed and adapted, but recognizably continuous with their origins. The Japanese cultural landscape today, with its regional diversity, its local festivals and traditions, its sacred sites and religious practices, carries forward elements from the age of the Forgotten Kingdoms, testament to the enduring power of cultural memory, even when formal historical records fail. The mountains and valleys where these kingdoms flourished remain, though transformed by centuries of human habitation and natural change. Standing in these landscapes today, one can still sense something of their ancient character. The mist-shrouded peaks, the deep forests, the rivers flowing toward the sea, these natural features remain much as they were thousands of years ago. In quiet moments, walking ancient paths or sitting beside old shrines, it becomes possible to feel a connection across time, to sense the presence of countless generations who have known these same places. The wooden structures of these ancient kingdoms, though long since returned to the earth, can still be imagined in their full glory. Imagine walking through the great gates of a mountain fortress, passing beneath carved beams that depicted protective deities and auspicious symbols, entering courtyards where warriors trained and merchants conducted business, where the daily life of a forgotten kingdom unfolded in all its complexity and richness. The palaces of ancient rulers combined practical defensive features with spiritual symbolism. Watchtowers provided views across valleys and mountain passes, warning of approaching dangers, while also serving as observation points for astronomical phenomena and divination practices. The placement of buildings followed geomantic principles, aligning structures with cardinal directions and sacred peaks to harness beneficial energies and ward off malevolent forces. Within palace compounds, distinct areas served different functions: residential quarters for the ruling family, administrative buildings where officials managed kingdom affairs, storage facilities for tribute goods and military equipment, workshops where craftsmen created the material culture that expressed the kingdom's identity and power. The organization of space reflected social hierarchies while also facilitating the complex activities required to govern even a modest kingdom. Ceremonial spaces held particular importance, requiring careful design to accommodate the elaborate rituals that maintained cosmic harmony and legitimized political authority. These spaces often incorporated natural features, positioning ritual platforms to face sacred mountains or overlooking rivers believed to connect earthly and divine realms. The architecture itself became part of religious symbolism, with specific structural elements representing cosmological principles or mythological narratives. The daily routines of palace life followed carefully prescribed patterns. Morning rituals welcomed the sun and offered prayers for the kingdom's prosperity. Audiences with petitioners and officials occurred at designated times according to their rank and the nature of their business. Meals were elaborate affairs with specific etiquette governing who could eat what and in what order. Evening ceremonies closed the day, offering thanks and prayers for protection through the night, when malevolent spirits were believed to be most active. Servants and attendants who maintained palace operations came from various social backgrounds. Some were members of lesser noble families, sent to serve as part of political alliances. Others were skilled craftspeople valued for their abilities. Still others were captives from conquered territories or debt servants working off obligations. Despite their subordinate status, palace servants could gain considerable influence through proximity to power and knowledge of court intrigues. The education of elite children in these ancient kingdoms combined practical training with cultural refinement and spiritual discipline. Boys destined for leadership learned martial arts, horsemanship, and military strategy alongside literacy, poetry, and ritual performance. Girls from noble families received training appropriate to their expected roles, which might include religious service, diplomatic marriages, or managing household economies. The most talented might also receive instruction in divination, healing, or other specialized knowledge. Festivals and celebrations punctuated the year, providing opportunities for communities to gather, reaffirm social bonds, and participate in collective rituals. Spring planting festivals sought blessings for good harvests. Summer ceremonies protected crops from pests and storms. Autumn Thanksgiving celebrated successful harvests. Winter solstice observances marked the year's turning and anticipated spring's return. These festivals involved music, dance, feasting, and often temporary suspension of normal social hierarchies. The preparation for major festivals required extensive coordination and resources. Offerings to kami had to be gathered or produced, ritual implements prepared or purified, participants trained in proper ceremonial procedures, spaces cleaned and sanctified. The festivals themselves could last for days, with different ceremonies marking morning, noon, and evening, and different participants taking on specific roles according to age, gender. Markets held in conjunction with festivals became important venues for trade and social interaction. Merchants traveled from distant regions to sell exotic goods. Craftspeople displayed their wares. Farmers brought surplus produce. These periodic markets supplemented more regular local exchange and helped integrate the kingdom's economy. They also served as venues for arranging marriages, settling disputes, and conducting diplomatic negotiations with representatives from other kingdoms. The legal systems that governed these ancient societies were based primarily on customary law, traditions passed down orally and understood through precedent rather than written codes. Disputes were typically settled through mediation by respected elders or clan leaders, with emphasis on restoration of harmony rather than punishment. More serious matters, especially those affecting the kingdom as a whole, might be brought before the ruler or decided through divination to determine the will of the kami. Crimes against persons or property were often handled through compensation systems, where offenders or their families paid restitution to victims. The amount of compensation varied according to the social status of both parties and the severity of the offense. This approach helped prevent cycles of revenge while also acknowledging that different people held different values within the social hierarchy, a pragmatic if not egalitarian solution to maintaining order. Some offences, particularly those considered sacrilege or threats to the cosmic order, required ritual purification rather than or in addition to material compensation. A person who violated taboos might need to undergo elaborate cleansing ceremonies, make offerings to offended kami, or even be temporarily or permanently exiled from the community. These spiritual punishments reflected beliefs that certain transgressions created pollution that could affect entire communities if not properly addressed. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to Simply About Earth. We're dedicated to bringing you these immersive journeys through forgotten worlds, exploring the civilizations and cultures that have shaped our world. Your subscription helps us continue this important work of making history accessible and engaging for everyone. The diplomatic relations between kingdoms ranged from formal alliances sealed with marriages and tribute exchanges to bitter rivalries that erupted into warfare. Diplomacy required skilled envoys who could navigate complex protocols, bear messages accurately, and negotiate effectively while representing their rulers' interests. These diplomats often came from noble families with generations of experience in such work, their expertise and connections making them valuable assets to their kingdoms. Marriage alliances were carefully negotiated diplomatic tools. A ruler might give a daughter or sister in marriage to another king to seal an alliance, with the understanding that she would serve as a liaison between the two realms, and that any children would create kinship bonds linking the kingdoms. Such marriages could bring decades of peace and cooperation, though they could also create succession disputes if competing heirs claimed authority through different maternal lineages. Tribute systems established hierarchical relationships between more and less powerful kingdoms. Weaker realms might offer annual tribute, specialized local products or labor services, in exchange for protection and recognition from stronger neighbors. These arrangements were often formalized through elaborate ceremonies that dramatized the subordinate kingdom's acceptance of inferior status, while also acknowledging its continued existence and right to internal autonomy. Hostage exchanges were another common diplomatic practice. Kingdoms might exchange high-ranking nobles, often heirs or close relatives of rulers, as guarantees of good faith and adherence to treaty terms. These hostages were typically treated well and might receive education and training at their host courts, potentially building personal relationships that could facilitate future cooperation. However, the implicit threat to hostages' safety remained a powerful deterrent against treaty violations. Religious pilgrimages and participation in inter-kingdom festivals provided opportunities for peaceful interaction and cultural exchange, even between realms that might be political rivals. The shared veneration of certain major shrines or participation in widespread religious traditions created common ground that transcended political divisions. Pilgrims traveling through various territories were typically granted safe passage, reflecting beliefs that harming religious travelers would invite divine punishment. The transmission of specialized knowledge between kingdoms occurred through various channels. Craftspeople might be invited to teach their skills in exchange for generous compensation and high status. Healers with particularly effective remedies might be sought out by rulers or wealthy families from distant regions. Scholars of divination, astronomy, or ritual practice might be consulted across kingdom boundaries. This knowledge exchange enriched all participating cultures while also creating networks of shared expertise. The introduction of writing systems to Japan, adapted from Chinese models, was a gradual process that probably began with diplomatic documents and religious texts before expanding to other uses. The earliest Japanese users of writing were likely scribes associated with rulers or major religious centers, individuals who had received training from continental immigrants or through study abroad. These literate specialists held privileged positions, serving as the interfaces between the oral culture of the masses and the emerging written culture of the elite. The adaptation of Chinese characters to Japanese language presented significant challenges. Chinese is a tonal language with relatively simple syllable structures, while Japanese is non-tonal with more complex syllables. Early writers developed various strategies, using characters for their semantic meanings, their phonetic values, or combinations of both. This complex system required extensive training to master but also allowed for subtle expressiveness and multiple levels of meaning. The earliest surviving Japanese texts, such as wooden tablets, excavated from archaeological sites, show the gradual development of writing conventions and the coexistence of multiple writing styles. Some texts use pure Chinese, others attempt to represent Japanese syntax using Chinese characters. Still others employ early versions of the syllabic scripts that would eventually make Japanese writing more accessible. These varied approaches reflect experimentation and adaptation, as Japanese writers worked to capture their language in written form. The content of early texts reveals the priorities and concerns of the societies that produced them. Many are administrative records tracking goods, labor obligations, land ownership, and official appointments. Others are religious in nature, preserving ritual procedures, prayers, and mythological narratives. Still others serve commemorative purposes, recording the deeds of rulers or significant events. Together they provide fragmentary but invaluable glimpses into the mental worlds of ancient Japanese peoples. The libraries that accumulated in palace compounds and major temples became treasuries of knowledge, storing not only locally produced texts but also imported works from China and Korea. These collections made possible the transmission of knowledge across generations and the development of increasingly sophisticated literary and scholarly traditions. Access to these libraries was restricted to privileged elites, creating knowledge hierarchies that reinforced social distinctions. Scribal training was arduous and time-consuming, requiring years of practice to master the thousands of characters needed for literacy. Students began by copying standard text repeatedly, gradually internalizing both the characters themselves and the literary styles and content of canonical works. The most successful students might eventually become teachers themselves, creating lineages of scholarly transmission that preserved and elaborated specific bodies of knowledge. The relationship between oral and written traditions was complex and complementary rather than oppositional. Even as literacy spread among elites, the majority of the population remained dependent on oral transmission for learning and communication. Many written works were intended to be read aloud or performed, serving as scripts for oral presentation rather than texts for silent reading. This oral-written interface continued to characterize Japanese culture long after writing became established. Songs and poetry composed in ancient times were often preserved through oral tradition, long before being written down. The distinctive rhythms and wordplay of Japanese poetry depended on oral performance, with meaning enhanced through vocal emphasis, timing, and sometimes musical accompaniment. When such works were eventually recorded in writing, scribes faced challenges in capturing the full richness of oral performance in static text, leading to the development of various notation systems to indicate pronunciation and rhythmic patterns. The mythology preserved in early chronicles represents a synthesis of diverse regional traditions. Each conquered kingdom had its own origin myths, genealogies of local kami, and sacred narratives explaining landscape features or ritual practices. As these kingdoms were incorporated into the Yamato state, their myths were often reinterpreted and integrated into a master narrative that emphasized imperial legitimacy while acknowledging regional traditions. Creation myths told how the Japanese islands emerged from primordial chaos, divine beings stirring the ocean with a jeweled spear until drops falling from its tip solidified into the first land. These mythological islands became the stage for divine dramas involving the sun goddess Amaterasu, the storm god Susanoo, and numerous other deities whose relationships and conflicts established patterns that humans were expected to emulate or avoid. The descent of divine ancestors to establish human rule connected earthly kingdoms to the cosmic order. Various clans claimed descent from different kami, with the imperial line asserting direct descent from Amaterasu herself. These divine genealogies served to legitimize political authority while also establishing protocols for ritual practice and religious organization. The interweaving of mythological and historical narratives in early chronicles makes it difficult to determine where legend ends and actual historical memory begins. Local legends preserved memories of ancient kingdoms even when formal historical records were silent. Stories of powerful rulers, magical treasures, battles with supernatural enemies, and miraculous events were passed down through generations, often associated with specific geographic locations. Modern scholars study these legends carefully, recognizing that they may contain kernels of historical truth embedded in mythological elaboration. Sacred landscapes featured prominently in both mythology and local religious practice. Mountains identified as dwelling places of particular kami became pilgrimage destinations. Rivers associated with purification or divine descent were venerated through riverside shrines. Rocks, caves, or trees that figured in legendary events were marked as sacred and protected from disturbance. These sacred sites connected communities to their mythological past while also serving as venues for ongoing religious practice. The spirits of deceased rulers and ancestors were believed to continue influencing the living world, requiring ongoing veneration and propitiation. Ancestral shrines within family compounds served as focal points for domestic religious practice, while tombs of particularly powerful rulers became sites of communal worship. The distinction between human and divine was fluid, with deceased rulers sometimes being recognized as kami and worshipped alongside other deities. The concept of pollution and purification was central to ancient Japanese religious practice. Contact with death, blood, disease, or other sources of spiritual contamination required purification rituals using water, salt, or other cleansing agents. These beliefs shaped daily practice, from washing hands before approaching shrines to elaborate ceremonies required after funerals or childbirth. The emphasis on purity reflected deeper concerns about maintaining boundaries between sacred and profane, order and chaos. Musical instruments used in religious ceremonies had symbolic as well as practical significance. Drums represented thunder, the voice of heaven shaking the earth. Flutes might evoke the sounds of wind through mountain passes or bird songs greeting the dawn. Bells and gongs marked transitions between ritual phases or summoned divine attention. The making of sacred instruments required ritual purification and proper materials, with the instruments themselves being treated as sacred objects deserving reverence. Costume and adornment for ritual performances followed prescribed patterns, specific colors, materials, and decorative elements being appropriate for different ceremonies and roles. The clothing worn by priestesses performing sacred dances differed markedly from that worn by male priests conducting other rituals, reflecting gender distinctions in religious roles. Masks, crowns, and other accessories transformed performers into representations of deities or mythological figures, allowing humans to embody divine presence during ceremonies. The scheduling of religious observances followed multiple overlapping calendars, the agricultural cycle, the lunar cycle, and systems of lucky and unlucky days derived from continental divination traditions. This complex temporal structure meant that religious specialists had to coordinate numerous considerations when planning ceremonies, ensuring that important rituals occurred at auspicious times, while also meeting practical needs related to agricultural schedules or political events. Weather prediction and control were important religious functions. Droughts threatened harvests, and communities depended on religious specialists to intercede with rain-bringing kami. Conversely, excessive rain or storms required rituals to calm angry deities and restore proper balance. The perceived effectiveness of these practices reinforced religious authority, while also reflecting genuine observation of natural patterns and development of weather prediction skills based on accumulated experience. Healing practices combined physical treatments with spiritual ministrations. Herbal remedies addressed specific symptoms, while prayers and rituals dealt with underlying spiritual causes of illness. The diagnosis of disease often involved divination to determine which kami had been offended or what spiritual pollution affected the patient. Treatment then addressed both physical and spiritual dimensions, reflecting holistic understanding of health and illness. Dreams were taken seriously as sources of knowledge about hidden realities and future events. Significant dreams might be shared with religious specialists for interpretation, with their meanings potentially influencing important decisions. Some individuals cultivated abilities to receive revelatory dreams through purification, fasting, or sleeping in sacred locations. Dream interpretation was an important skill, requiring knowledge of symbolic associations and cultural contexts to decode the messages believed to come from the spirit world. Sleep now, knowing that you are part of this long human story, that the forgotten kingdoms of Japan, though vanished from political maps, live on in the cultural DNA of a people, in the festivals and rituals, in the sacred sites and artistic traditions, in the collective memory that spans generations. These kingdoms may have been forgotten in the conventional historical sense, but they remain present in ways both subtle and profound, woven into the fabric of Japanese culture, contributing to the rich tapestry that is human civilization. Rest peacefully, cradled in the knowledge that nothing is ever entirely lost, that the courage and creativity of ancient peoples continues to inspire and influence the world, even when their names have faded from memory. The mountains still stand, the rivers still flow, and somewhere in the quiet places, the spirits of those ancient kingdoms still whisper their stories to those who know how to listen. In the gentle darkness that surrounds you now, feel yourself becoming lighter, as if the weight of the day is slowly lifting from your shoulders, your breath growing slower, deeper, more rhythmic, like waves upon a distant shore. Each breath carries you further from the concerns of waking life, closer to the realm of dreams where time moves differently, where past and present flow together like streams merging into a great river. The forgotten kingdoms await you there. In that twilight realm between consciousness and sleep, their gates stand open, welcoming you into courtyards where ancient peoples once gathered, where Queen Himiko once held court, where warriors trained and craftsmen worked, where children played games that have been forgotten for 1,000 years. You are not merely observing these scenes, but participating in them, walking paths that have long since returned to forest. touching walls that crumbled into dust centuries ago, yet somehow remain eternally present in the space where memory and imagination intertwine. Feel the cool mountain mist on your skin, that distinctive dampness of Japanese mountains before dawn, when the world is suspended between darkness and light, between sleep and waking. Smell the wood smoke from countless hearth fires, the incense burning in mountain shrines, the rich earth after summer rains, the salt spray from coastal waters. These sensations, though impossible in your physical location, become real in the dreaming mind, which knows no boundaries of time or space. Listen, and you might hear the distant sound of drums from a festival long ago, the chanting of priests in ceremonies whose purpose has been forgotten, the laughter of children playing in courtyards that exist now only in imagination. These sounds are not mere fantasy, but echoes of reality, preserved somehow in the fabric of existence, available to those who know how to listen with more than physical ears. Tomorrow will bring new discoveries, new insights into these forgotten worlds. But tonight, simply allow yourself to drift on the currents of time, back through the centuries, back to misty mountains and hidden valleys, to the land where gods and mortals walked together, where kingdoms rose from the earth like sacred peaks reaching toward heaven, where the foundations of Japanese civilization were laid by peoples whose stories we are only now beginning to recover. Your breathing has slowed, now deep and regular, like the breathing of the earth itself, like the slow rise and fall of ocean waves, like the eternal rhythm of the cosmos breathing in and out, creating and dissolving, forming and releasing. You are part of this rhythm, have always been part of it, will always be part of it. This knowledge brings peace, a deep settling into the certainty of your place in the grand pattern of existence. In your dreams tonight, you might walk the wooden ramparts of an ancient fortress, watching the sun rise over mountains that guard the borders of a realm now forgotten. You might stand in a sacred grove as shamans conduct ceremonies that connect earth and heaven, might watch craftsmen shape bronze and iron into objects of beauty and power, might sit with villagers around evening fires as they share stories passed down from their ancestors. These are not mere dreams but memories, somehow accessible across the gulf of time, available to consciousness when it releases its grip on the immediate and opens to the eternal. Feel the warm mist rising from rice paddies in the morning light. Smell the incense burning in mountain shrines. Hear the distant sound of drums marking the rhythm of ancient ceremonies. These sensory experiences, though separated from us by millennia, somehow remain accessible through imagination and the fragmentary evidence that survives. In touching these ancient worlds, even tentatively and incompletely, we touch something essential about human nature, the drive to create, to build, to organize ourselves into communities, to seek meaning in our existence. Let yourself float now. Drift like cherry blossoms on a spring breeze, carried by winds that have blown through these valleys for countless generations, past the great capitals of later eras, past the age of samurai and shoguns, back to a time before history began, when kingdoms whose names we barely know flourished in isolation, when peoples whose faces we cannot see built lives of meaning and purpose in harmony with their mountainous landscape. The stars that shone down on those ancient kingdoms shine down on you tonight. The same moon that witnessed their rise and fall casts its gentle light upon your sleeping world. Time itself seems to fold back upon itself in these quiet hours, past and present, merging into a timeless now where all moments exist simultaneously, where the forgotten kingdoms are not lost but merely waiting, preserved in that eternal realm where all things that have ever been continue to exist. Close your eyes and feel the presence of those countless generations, their dreams and hopes, their fears and triumphs, their daily struggles and moments of transcendent beauty. All of this remains somehow present, woven into the very fabric of existence. You are connected to them by bonds both visible and invisible, genetic inheritance, cultural transmission, and that mysterious commonality of human experience that transcends all boundaries of time and space. In the quiet sanctuary of sleep, boundaries dissolve. The kingdoms that history forgot remember themselves through you, their stories finding new life in the dreaming mind, their spirits stirring in response to attention paid across the gulf of centuries. This is not mere fancy, but a genuine form of communion, a way of honoring and preserving that which might otherwise be lost forever to the indifference of time. Rest now in the embrace of history, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom and love of countless generations. The challenges they faced, the solutions they devised, the beauty they created. All of this remains as part of the human inheritance, available to inspire and guide us as we face our own challenges and opportunities. We are not alone in our struggles, but part of an unbroken chain of humanity, stretching back to the very dawn of civilization. Your body grows heavier now, sinking deeper into whatever surface supports you, every muscle releasing its tension, every joint softening. Your mind drifts like a boat slipping its moorings, floating free on dark waters, carried by currents you need not understand or control, simply surrendering to the natural flow that leads toward deep and restorative sleep. Sleep well, knowing that the forgotten kingdoms of Japan, though their names may have faded from common memory, continue to live in ways both subtle and profound. Their architectural principles influence modern Japanese design, their spiritual practices continue in contemporary Shinto rituals, their artistic sensibilities inform Japanese aesthetics, their wisdom about living in harmony with nature speaks with increasing urgency to our ecologically challenged world. Tomorrow you will wake to face the particular challenges of your own time and place, but tonight, simply rest in the knowledge that you are part of something far greater than yourself. The story that began in those misty mountains and hidden valleys continues in your dreams, in your connection to all who came before and all who will come after. The adventure continues, the great human story unfolds, and you, like every person who has ever lived, have a vital part to play. But not tonight. Tonight you simply rest. Simply are. Simply allow yourself to be held in the gentle embrace of sleep. May your dreams carry you to those ancient landscapes, to the gates of forgotten kingdoms, to the sacred peaks where gods once dwelt among mortals. May you walk with queens and shamans, with craftsmen and warriors, with all those countless ordinary people whose extraordinary efforts built civilizations that would shape the world. May you find in their stories inspiration for your own journey, courage for your own challenges, and hope for the future we all share. But for now, just rest, just breathe, just allow yourself to sink deeper into the softness of sleep. The rivers still flow from the mountains to the sea, the cherry blossoms still bloom in spring, and somewhere in the eternal present of human becoming, the forgotten kingdoms of Japan still rise, their towers reaching toward heaven, their peoples living lives of meaning and purpose. This is not just ancient history. This is the eternal story of human aspiration and achievement, the endless tale of which you are both inheritor and author. But these thoughts too can fade now, as sleep claims you, pulling you down into its gentle darkness, where dreams await. Sleep peacefully, now cradled in the knowledge of your place in the great human story. Breathe deeply. Let go of the concerns and anxieties of the day. Allow yourself to sink into the soft embrace of sleep. The forgotten kingdoms wait for you in the realm of dreams, their stories ready to unfold, their wisdom available to those who seek it. Rest, dream, and know that morning will come, bringing with it new opportunities to honor the legacy of those who came before by continuing their great work of building, creating, and dreaming of better worlds. But morning is far away, and sleep is here, warm and welcoming, pulling you down into its depths. The mists gather in mountain valleys, cherry blossoms fall like snow in the moonlight, and in the space between waking and sleeping, between past and present, the forgotten kingdoms of Japan whisper their secrets to the dreaming mind. Listen, and you might hear the voices of ancient peoples speaking across the centuries, sharing the wisdom earned through countless generations of living close to the earth and the gods. Their voices growing softer now, fading into the general hum of silence, as sleep takes you completely, wrapping you in its dark and peaceful embrace. Sweet dreams, dear listener, and may your rest be filled with visions of those hidden worlds, those sacred peaks and mysterious valleys, where the forgotten kingdoms flourished in their golden age. Until morning light awakens you to write the next chapter of our shared story, rest in peace, rest in wonder, rest in the knowledge that nothing is ever truly forgotten, that all that has been continues to shape all that is, and all that will be, in the endless dance of becoming that is human civilization. Rest now, sleep now, dream now of ancient Japan, where mist-shrouded peaks guard the secrets of forgotten kingdoms, where rivers carry memories of vanished peoples, where every stone and tree remembers the footsteps of those who came before. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Japan's hidden past. If you found meaning in this exploration of forgotten kingdoms, please consider subscribing to Simply About Earth and sharing this video with others who might appreciate these deep dives into lost worlds. Until next time, may you find wonder in the hidden corners of history and inspiration in the stories of peoples who built civilizations beneath the mountains, creating beauty and meaning and harmony with the natural world, leaving us a legacy that continues to enrich and inspire long after their kingdoms have faded from maps and their names from common memory. Good night, sleep well, and dream of ancient Japan, where mist-shrouded peaks guard the secrets of forgotten kingdoms, where rivers carry memories of vanished peoples, where every stone and tree remembers the footsteps of those who came before. In the eternal now of dreaming, these kingdoms live again, their peoples going about their lives, unaware that millennia hence, someone will lie down to sleep and journey back through time to walk their streets and witness their world. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace, and may you wake refreshed, carrying forward the timeless human story, adding your own verse to the endless poem of civilization. Good night, and farewell until we meet again on Simply About Earth.